Alexandria, thanks for inviting us to your studio.
Thanks for being here.
I read you described the way you work, where you start the process and you really don't know how it's going to turn out. The conversations I have with people are kind of like that too.
Yeah.
Let me begin by asking you about something you said. You described your work as having a certain joyfulness. Can you explain what you mean and tell us where that joyfulness comes from?
I think I'm just naturally a happy person, and when I'm painting, the colors just come out. I sometimes try to do it another way, and it always comes out in these bright colors. Painting is really it's the way that I think and feel and process all my emotions. It's very necessary to my just my being. So, and people around me know that. If I go too long without painting, I'm kind of unpleasant to be around. So, I think sometimes people think that just throughout history of art that artists have to have a certain tortured soul, or I don't necessarily believe that you have to be in an unhappy place to make great art. I think I think you can be a happy person. And when I was younger, I knew I would paint my whole life, and I didn't want to. I'm a happy person, and I wanted to be happy and still make art. So I found a way to do that.
You also wrote it that at age 21, when you were finishing your fine arts degree, you were determined to be a full-time working artist. But it sounds like you even knew you were going to do that before?
Oh, I knew that since I was a very young child. When I was 7 or 8, I would draw and paint for fun. Around that age, a neighbor of ours went back to school and got her fine arts degree as a mature student, and I remember she was over one day and the subject of art lessons came up, and so I started going every Saturday morning with her to her studio, and I did that till I finished high school, so for about 10 years. And so being in an artist studio is a very natural environment for me. I'm very comfortable. It's where I feel most like myself. And she introduced me to all techniques. We did acrylic painting, watercolor painting, oil painting, photography, Polaroids, paper making, bookbinding. She showed me all of it. So I guess when I finished school, the last year of my fine arts degree is very much independent study anyway, and just because the year ended, I felt like I wasn't quite finished yet. So I said, well, I'm going to paint for the summer. And I ended up renting a studio space from a group of artists in Moncton in the Centre Culturel Aberdeen, which is an art center. It's multidisciplinary, so there are dancers and actors and photographers, and it was just this really vibrant place. And they just welcomed me in. It was great. It was a great place for me, and really, that's where I learned really how to live as an artist. All the things you didn't teach in school, like how to get ready for an exhibition or apply for a grant, or all the things you really need to know. I learned from those people, and it was really just a great place to be. So at the end of the summer, then I already had a residency lined up for the next summer in Bay St. Paul, and I had 2 shows the following year. So it's like, well, I'll make it a year, and then 2 years, and then now it's over 20 years.
So when you're young and this is what you want to do, that you want to be an artist, did your folks ever say to you, listen, Alexandria, that's a nice idea, but don't you think you might want to have a day job or something, Did you have that conversation with your folks?
I think they saw that it was something that I needed to do.
You were doomed.
Yeah, I didn't have a choice. And I think, the fine arts degree was fine. I think at the end of that, there was sort of some question is, well, what do you mean you're going to paint? But they've always been really supportive, which I think I'm very lucky because I think it's unusual. I think often a lot of people are told, well, you can't do that. And I was never told you can't do that. So, yeah, I'm pretty lucky.
How do you balance like the work-life thing, being a mother and being a working artist?
I had a hard time with it at the beginning. I painted for 10 years before I had my family, and I worked hard. I worked all the time, and I guess I saw that continuing. I thought I would have a large family, like maybe 6 kids or something, and I pictured myself painting, and there'd be kids around me, and of course it's not the way that it works. And it was more, for me the hardest part was when I was working all the time, there's a continuation. You work all day, you work at night, you think about it all night. When you go back the next day, it's a continuation of what you were doing the day before. And then all of a sudden, when you have other responsibilities and you're not there quite as often and your mind is elsewhere, then I'd rush to the studio, I'd get there, I'd work, and I'd come home and I'd be with the kids, and then I'd go back, and I couldn't remember what I was doing when I was there the last time. So it was that continuation, or that just that break in the train of thought that I really struggled with. But I learned really quickly just how to manage my time, and yeah.
I should mention to our viewers that your studio is in your home here in Sackville, which is a beautiful century-old or 140-year-old house. So when they hear the furnace kick in, they'll know that
Yeah.
we're not in some office building out in the industrial part where you've got a studio. When you come into your studio to work on a piece, you say you don't know how it's going to end up, but in that case, how do you know when it's finished?
Yeah, it's just something you learn how to do, I guess. I prefer to work on the floor, and ideally I would like to have several paintings going at one time, and I move quickly from one to the other. I'm a little limited by space here, but that would be the best way for me to work, is I work really quickly, I mix colors quickly, and I move around, and I'm really just reacting to what's there, and I build up layers and layers of color, and that's when it really starts to get interesting to me, is when I see the layers and the colors coming through from underneath. So the image can change a multitude of times. I might start with it this way and end up with an image this way. I have no problem painting over a painting. I don't think it's a backward step. I think it's all building up to the final image, and it may change many times, and that's what I like about it.
But how do you know when it's the final image? I'm curious.
I'm sure there's times when I go too far. But
I guess when you go too far, it's hard to come back.
yeah, but then you just keep building on it and keep working. So I guess I can't really answer when. I just know.
Can you take it? Can you try to replicate? I mean, or is that like a crazy way to go about it? See, if I start here, I might get to that point again.
Yeah, I guess I wouldn't want to do that. I think of all my paintings as one big long series of painting. Each one teaches me something that makes me want to go to the next one. I've been painting for over 20 years, and I still feel like I'm beginning. There's still so many paintings left to paint. So
you can tell me, is it a search, and there's like something out there that you're going to arrive at? Is it that kind of a process, or?
I guess it feels like that, but in a sense, you never really want to arrive at it, or you'd be done.
For a long time, you were painting flowers, and then you transitioned to painting busy women. Can you explain that, how that transition came about?
Yeah, I painted flowers for about 15 years, and for all that time, they satisfied what I was looking for, and just movement and color and shape and form, and then when I had my children, and I realized I was just trying to find that balance, and I guess well, I was really interested in how other female artists had how they balanced it, because I think the creative pull is so strong, and maybe even mirrors the kind of maternal instinct. Like, I really felt pulled in a lot of directions, even though I really wanted to be home with my kids too, and I was so happy and really grateful to painting that it gave me the flexibility to do that. But I was thinking that, and I really didn't know any other visual artists who were women with young families. Most of the painters I knew around me were men, and they were older, so they just didn't have those responsibilities on their time. And I read a lot about female artists, and that really didn't help me either. I found that either if women had known they wanted to be artists, they chose not to have a family, or they focused on their family and then waited to focus on their art after. And neither one of those applied to me, because I was already in the middle of both. So, but I did really think about it, and all the women who were around me were all really dealing with the same thing: how to work full-time and be home full-time, and really balance everything so that their children were happy, and their life felt, full. So that's how it really started, with this, just the idea that we're always rushing all the time. And so I really wanted these sort of anonymous figures that were rushing over the surface of the painting. I had started with portraits of my kids, and then self-portraits, and then really wanted a more sort of, anonymous figure. So I started using these silhouettes, and at that point the idea of a stencil, which obliterates all the detail, was interesting to me. And I've always liked a repetition of images, and I really think that even more so in today's world, where we're used to seeing everything on screens and everything sort of moving fast and repeated, that maybe a single image isn't really sufficient enough to sort of get that across. So I like these day glow colors anyway, so that's how it started. I was spray painting and using stencils, and taping and rolling, and that's how it started.
You also describe your busy women as superheroes.
Well, I like to think of the busy woman as a superwoman. It sort of moved from one to the other. And this spring, when I was working on a very large painting for an exhibition at the Beaverbrook Art Gallery called, the show was called Hot Pop Soup. And I was invited to be part of this show, which was about artists who had been influenced by pop art. And I knew I was going to do this large painting, which ended up being 24 feet long. So I guess my issue was, how do I get these small figures to, I wanted them larger than life, and the stencils were actually 7 feet high. So I wanted you to look at this woman, and she's huge. So, but it became a sort of a technical, going from a shape to, when it's that large, it's more about positive and negative space and how that would read visually. And then also considering pop art, I had never thought of my work as pop art. Pop art had a very specific time and place, New York in the 60s, and really just a handful of male artists were the original pop art movement. And they were reacting to advertising at the time that was directed at women and housewives who were the primary consumers that day of household. So then I started trying to position myself that way. While I'm a female artist, I'm in New Brunswick. It's 50 years later, and I'm also basically a housewife. So how can I react to that and have it fit within the realm of the show so that I was happy with it? So I started thinking of the idea of a supermarket and how, supermarket is something everyone's got to do. You got to go get your groceries and things like that. And also the idea of 24/7. When you think of even how a grocery store has changed in 50 years, now they're these big box stores and they're open all the time. So I was thinking of those ideas, and as I started working on it, and I had to work on it in pieces here in my studio, I sort of started with the idea of these shelves, items on a shelf, and it just sort of naturally evolved to be the shelves were holding all these little women, and I thought, well, if I sort of put them in boxes, then they look like action figures, and how come there aren't more women action figures anyway? And then they so throughout the painting, which I worked on for about 6 months last winter, they grew from these little characters in the boxes to larger than life. So
if the original pop art movement were men in New York in the 60s reacting to advertising, and here you are in in New Brunswick, how do you manage being a working artist? What's it like to essentially run your art business from here? You're not in New York. You're not. Mm-hmm. What are those challenges like?
I think the way the world is, you can really work anywhere, and particularly in the art world, you can live anywhere and show anywhere else. And then, the internet allows images to be sort of everywhere in that sense too, if someone wants to find out about your work. Maybe when I was younger, I was more concerned with getting my work farther afield. Now I'm just so content that I'm painting. That's really the most important thing, is to be painting.
So no disadvantage when it comes to marketing?
There's probably some disadvantage, just in that there aren't as many public places to show your work, or institutions that, or even galleries. I mean, we have a certain amount, but it's, and just, I think in general, I mean, it's not, I live in Sackville, and Sackville has a great population of artists. A lot of artists live in Sackville. And I'm just happy to be, I love it here. It's a small town. I can be anywhere in 5 minutes. The perks and the perks of living here, I think, outweigh any disadvantages. I think I think maybe it's North American, but it's, I'd like to see a greater respect put on artists in society in general. And I think that would trickle down to, greater art education in schools, and, when you think back to, several hundred years ago, artists were sort of held in a respect. They had importance in society, and now I don't think that's there anymore.
Well, I think I'd argue with you on that point.
Yeah?
I think artists are held in high regard.
Do you?
I'd like to think so.
I would like to think so.
I live in Newfoundland, and there's value assigned to cultural industries, and I hope you're wrong.
Okay.
So what's next for you? What do you what's on your calendar? If that's the way to put the question.
Well, I have a show in the spring that I'm working on right now, and then I'm going to do some more rug hooking as well, which I also do with some of the same imagery. I'd like to do some 7-foot rugs of women, busy women, super women.
So the pop piece that you did was for a show at the Beaverbrook Gallery in Fredericton in spring, summer of 2012.
Mm-hmm.
Is the fact that you've done the pop thing, now you're going on the rug hooking, was that like a...
No. No, I was rug hooking before the pop thing came about. Yeah, no.
Do you sense that maybe the pop thing is now going to kind of go the way of the flowers and you're moving on to something else now?
Yeah, I think so. I can't really predict what's going to happen next. I'm still definitely working on the women, but yeah, we'll see what happens.
I wonder if it coincides with like different life stages.
Oh, I think definitely it does, yeah. I think art is a reflection of your life, and I think that's what it should be, you know.
Yeah, I see you have written on the back of your door here, you know, every good artist paints what Jackson Pollock said he is, but you changed it to she is.
Yeah. Yeah, I've had that up for a while, and I think it's true. I think you have to paint from your heart and, you know, really ask yourself what it's all about. So.
I'd like to come back to like the creative process. I'm intrigued by the idea that you start something, you really don't know how it's going to turn out. It just evolves.
Mm-hmm.
And knowing when it's over is a bit of guesswork. But you know, the creative impulse that says start in this direction. Do you know when it's percolating, and you know, I've got to get to the studio. There's something I've got to do. Something's stirring in me. Is it like that?
Well, sometimes it is like that, but I try to work every day anyway, so I work regardless of whether it's there or not. And even, you know, people say, well, what if you have a creative block? I just work through it anyway.
Do you have creative blocks? I suppose, like, right? Is there the visual artists have the equivalent of a writer's block?
Yeah, you can. Not too often, but sometimes if you've really worked, say, towards a show, and then, you know, you've put months or years into working towards this work, and now you finally see it up. Sometimes I have to step away for a little bit and think about, okay, now what am I going to do next?
Yeah, I would think there'd be a point where you would be empty.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, and you need to just sort of get going again.
Do you read?
I read a lot.
What are you reading now?
I'm reading a graphic novel about, it's written by an Iranian woman about her childhood, but it's in comic strip form. That's for my book club, but I also read several art books at a time, so I'm reading some David Hockney books and a pop art book that was written in the 60s by Lucy Lippard. And what else am I looking at now? Those are what I'm doing now.
Do you write?
Not a lot, although there's a bit of writing. I sort of force myself to sit down and write about my work every once in a while, so it makes it clearer in my mind, and also I just find it useful to do.
In the couple of minutes we have left, I'm just curious, like on a domestic front, do your daughters ever come in and say, "Mommy, what's that?" Or does your husband ever come by and say, "Yeah, I don't think so"?
No. Usually my kids peek in here every day and say, they usually say, "Oh, I love that one," or "I like that one." So.
This must be like a magic place for your children, I would think.
Well, when they were off school this summer, when I was coming in to paint, they wanted to paint too. So.
When you were growing up, you said there was a woman, an artist, who kind of opened her studio to you and opened the world of art to you. Do you find yourself doing that now for young women, girls?
I like to go and volunteer in the schools and bring my paints and let them paint. And that's sort of, they're so excited. All the kids are just so excited to have real paint and be able to move it around. So, and I really think it can, it has the ability to teach you so much, logic and, deduction, what happens when I do this, and so fact and problem solving and just creative thinking, which I think is really going to be even more necessary as the world goes on. So, but also for some kids, art may be an outlet that they need to, just for their own emotions, that maybe they can't say something some other way, but they'll be able to do it through painting or drawing.
I would think one of the lessons would be no fear.
Yeah, and I think you have to get to kids when they're still young enough so that they haven't developed that idea. It's like, oh, I can't do it, or, when kids are little, they just like, oh, I want to be an artist, so they dive right in, and that's great. That's what I want to see. So
that's great. I'm delighted to have met you. To meet somebody who was determined to do something at age 21 and did it. Good for you.
Oh, thank you very much.
Listen, thanks for letting us come to your studio. It was really a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks for being here.